Uh, let's get the party started here. So let me share my screen. We got a lot to cover today. I'll give these two a quick intro and then we'll get started here. Can you guys see the slide on the screen, Millie, Jerry?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
So, webinar today. So we teamed up with ZoomInfo and Reveneer to do some cold email breakdowns. And the reason why we thought this would be kind of fun is I think what people are sort of used to seeing, I don't know if you two see this on LinkedIn, is people like to post a lot of the bad emails,
Mm.
but they never post what the good ones look like. So we're going to talk about what some of the good emails look like today. So we'll probably spend the first, maybe 10, 15 minutes talking about sort of state of cold email, best practices, etc. Before we get to that and the email breakdowns, just some quick intros. If you haven't seen my work before or anything like that, and you're new to that, my name's Jason Bay. I run a company called Blissful Prospecting, and I train SDRs, BDRs, account executives on how to do outbound, so how to turn complete strangers into paying customers. I'm going to be hosting today. Millie, why don't you give yourself a quick intro? I know you're the senior manager of revenue gen at ZoomInfo. You do a lot of things there, but you want to give a quick 30-second. What are you in charge of at ZoomInfo?
Yeah, and thanks for having me today, Jason.
Yeah.
Like Jason said, my name's Millie Beetham. I'm the senior manager of revenue generation here at ZoomInfo, and I manage a team of campaign specialists who develop and execute outbound prospecting and marketing strategies at scale. And we support the over 1,000 sellers that ZoomInfo has today. So unique position. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility too.
Yeah.
Um, Jerry is the director of sales development and lead gen at Reveneer. Jerry, same kind of thing. You want to give yourself a quick 30-second. What do you guys do over there? What are you in charge of? And we'll dig in today.
For sure. So, as stated, Director of Sales Development at Lead Gen here at Reveneer. Reveneer, we design, build, and manage dedicated outbound sales development teams. So right now we have around 80 active clients, and we have over 200 SDRs in our office, actually. So I luckily get to see, email open reply rates from over 80 different companies and see the big differences there. So really excited to talk about that today.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a conversation about cold email, because I think what's really interesting about both of you and your perspective is that I mean, Millie, 1,000 plus reps you guys are doing this for. Jerry, 80 plus clients, a couple hundred. Like, you guys have a lot of macro data, and I think that for someone that might work inside of a company that's much smaller with like one persona or maybe two personas, they don't get to see stuff over thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of data points. So, Millie, want to direct the first question over to you. Like, when you think about messaging and you guys need to create a campaign, like, what are some of the principles or steps? Like, what are some of the first things that you do when you want to craft a good message? What do you believe are kind of the fundamentals behind a good email?
Yeah. So I think to start, like the number one thing I'm thinking about is like relevance, right? So my goal is to write an email that's directed at one person. And then by starting with one person, I like back out right into, well, how would I send this same sentiment to 30 people, to 100 people, to 1,000 people? And you kind of figure out where those things break and what data you have or you don't have. And then you can adjust, right, your strategy from there. But I think one of the key things that I teach my campaign specialists today is start by thinking about what you're doing from the perspective of that single buyer persona, that single person that's going to get that email, and pick someone and actually do that exercise.
Okay, that is the biggest sequencing hack in my experience, is how to make a sequence not look like a sequence. Right. And what I heard from you, it's a tip that I give a lot too, is that when you're going to write a sequence, write it for the individual first, and then look at how you could kind of customize that or do it at scale. Did I get what you're saying right there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Really interesting. And when you say relevance, I know, Jerry, on your guys' end of things, you do believe in like personalizing and adding like relevance to the message. And we're going to look at some good and bad examples of that. How do you think about relevance? Because you guys have a really tough challenge, I think, of you do this for a lot of different companies, and I'm assuming they sell into a lot of different personas, right? So how do you guys think about adding relevance to a message? What needs to be included? How do you think about, kind of segmenting that sort of stuff? How do you think about the message?
For sure. Our first stop is LinkedIn. There's some real good gold for relevance on individuals on LinkedIn. You can see, skills or recent posts that you can include. And we like to include it in the beginning of the email just because the email preview is what can help get that open rate up. So if you can get relevance into those first few lines of the email, so when it's in their inbox, they can see it and click on that, that can be huge. If we don't see it on LinkedIn, we'll revert to company relevance. Is there growth? Are they hiring in a certain level? Did they get any type of funding or anything in the news that's positive? And we can relate that. So if somebody's LinkedIn's empty or if they don't have a LinkedIn by chance, you can always result to the company for that relevance because there's plenty of news on their company out there.
Got it. And as we're going through this for everyone watching, feel free, the Q&A button here at the bottom of Zoom, feel free to drop a question in there. And before we kind of dig into this a little bit more in depth, in the chat, I'd like to kind of see if you two don't mind, what do you guys struggle with most when it comes to the cold emails that you're sending? Could you guys help us out in the chat? We have looks like 350 people on right now. I'd love to see so that we could customize the content for you a little bit. What are you struggling with most when it comes to your cold emails? I did not think that people would say subject lines this much, actually, but getting people to open the emails. Yeah, of course, the response rate for sure. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, getting them opened, metrics. Okay, so this is kind of a good segue. And again, we're going to show you guys a bunch of examples here in a second. When you guys think of metrics, I'll kick this question over to you first, Millie. When you think of like a baseline, what are you looking at in terms of open rates, reply rates, positive versus negative? At what point do you feel like a campaign is performing like well? What are some of those baseline metrics that you
Yeah.
look at? You may not really care much about open rate. Like some people don't look at that a lot, but
Yeah.
what are kind of the baseline metrics that you care about most?
Um, so obviously, open and reply rate, we see like on average around, anywhere from a 55 to a 58% open rate, and anywhere from sort of like 2.7 to 3.2 in terms of reply rate. But one of the things I think that's also really interesting to look at is your team's activity in terms of calls against those segmented groups, right, that you're emailing out to. So the email engagement is one aspect, I think, of measuring that performance. But then how many of your sellers actually called through that list and how many connects did they get? We have a KPI that we look at that's more around like a normalized response rate that takes into consideration both the call connect rate and the email reply rate. So it gives us a better understanding of like overall the engagement. I think, and then sort of the last piece of that is obviously sentiment, right? Like 2.7 to 3.2% reply rate. But if all of those replies are really bad, right? Please don't email me again. Like go away. Don't ever talk to me again. Then, you have to take that into consideration and adjust.
So you're sort of looking at what would be the absolute lowest open rate on a campaign for you to not be worried about the open rate and be like, okay, cool, we have something here. People are at least looking at this enough. What would be the minimum for you?
I think from the context, I think probably, Jerry, you can answer this a little bit better. Like I sit within a brand that's very well known. So like, I feel like my understanding's a little skewed, but I would say anything under 30% for us is we've made a huge mistake. Maybe send time was off. Maybe just the subject line was totally off base, et cetera.
Got it. And then you said for reply rates, 2.7 to 3.2% is sort of the zone of reply rates. And what percentage of those would be positive?
We probably see about 50-50. Like 50% of those are positive sentiment, 50% are either negative or sort of neutral.
Yeah. Okay, and you mentioned, and I'll kick another question over your way here, Jerry, in a second. You mentioned something I think that's important not to gloss over. You said the normalized response rate. So
Yeah,
for everyone sending sequences, what's really important, because just because people don't reply to emails doesn't mean that didn't help you get them to pick up the phone and vice versa. I see a lot of it the other way too, where we put calls into the sequence and we leave voicemails and say, "Hey, Jerry, sent you an email. The subject line is, prospecting or cold calling or whatever."
right.
uh, and that driving the open rate and then the meetings book. So I think, like, especially when you're doing multi-channel, making sure to look at the total reply rates, including phone calls and that sort of stuff, is super important. um, Jerry, how do you think about sort of these baseline metrics? What are you guys looking at in a campaign around like open rates, reply rates, that sort of stuff? And then I'll pull up some subject lines too that you guys have that perform really well that we'll share with folks here in a second. But baseline, kind of sort of open reply rates, what are you looking at in campaigns over there at Revenue?
For sure. So with us, we work in many different industries, from cybersecurity to focusing on salespeople, and it ranges. With a cybersecurity company, we could see rates in the 20-25% range. Trying to establish a brand, we are building their go-to-market strategy. So that's more on the lower end. When we're targeting sales leaders, we're seeing 50% plus. So it really ranges on who we're targeting. But whenever we're starting a campaign, we're going to A/B test subject lines to see what the rates are going to look like. A lot of the times, I'll start with 3 or 4 subject lines to test out simultaneously to see where the rates are. Like, let me get a gauge on it, because we can write the best email in the world, but if we're not getting opens, we're not going to get to the replies. So the first thing is get a successful subject line, test it, benchmark it, and then you can focus on the body, the CTA, everything on that end. So, it does range industry to industry, but the way we test it with multiple subject lines, we can get a good benchmark to build a repeatable open rate.
Yeah, got it. Are there anything that you guys see between the two of you that affect open rates that people aren't really thinking about? So, for example, I noticed that I love video prospecting, but I notice when I tend to embed any kind of media into an email, the open rate tends to go down quite a bit. Is there anything like that that you guys see people doing that's, hey, don't do these things because things outside of your control will keep this email from getting opened? Is there anything like that, like number of links to share? Should you share links or not? What kind of stuff do you guys see there affecting open rates in your experience?
Jerry, you want to go first on that one? I could follow.
Sure. With links or images embedded into it, we usually put it later in the sequence just so that domain understands, we've sent emails before that are proper and not going to the spam filter. So that's the first email should be pretty standard with just text, and then you can supplement it with links or images later on. That's how we avoid spam filters. We see a very lowered open rate whenever we try something like a video or a link in that first email.
Yep.
Yeah. I would say the other thing to just consider, right, is the sophistication of your potential customers in terms of their business probably relates to how well their email sort of deliverability, their spam filters, their operations, IT is set up. And so you've got to kind of like adjust your expectations. If you're trying to sell into SMB companies, you're probably going to hit their primary inbox a heck of a lot more, regardless of what you say. Versus if you're trying to sell into an enterprise account, it's going to take you quite a bit of time to get that authority, right? And actually hit an inbox, not make it into some sort of spam filter, or not get just filtered into some additional folder, right, that somebody's got set up on their side. So be thoughtful about like the sophistication of the business on the other end and what they might have set up that's keeping you right out or in.
Yeah, I love this. I dropped a little link in there, you guys, in the chat to mail-tester.com. It's good to, especially for some of you folks working at startups, send an email to that link and it'll tell you all the stuff that's wrong with the email server, the email, the copy, that sort of stuff. So the consensus here, and I see something very similar, is try to avoid a lot of media in the first email at least, or a lot of links. I want that email to get delivered first because the second, third, fourth emails are going to have a way higher deliverability rate. Okay, so Jerry, I want to take a look. You guys have some really great subject lines here. And I wanted to just spend some time talking about these because getting the email opened is, it's half the battle. So let's talk about these. So you guys can see what these subject lines are and the open rates. But Jerry, do you want to talk a little bit more about the principles behind these subject lines and why they work?
Yeah, so with these, you could tell they're all very short. Keeping them, 4 words or less. You want to keep it condensed. The first two, Revenue dash company. That's one of the first subject lines we test with all of our clients to gauge an open rate is their company name dash the company that they prospect into. We see it universally has a pretty decent open rate. You could see 48%. It is on the lower end here, but still about half the emails we're sending with that subject line are at least getting eyes on it. From there, the sales persona, predictable pipeline for a company. Sales leaders seem to open that because, having a predictable pipeline as a sales leader is very important.
Yeah.
So they see it and clearly they want to get their eyes on that. And then, small question, quick question. Small question is pretty unique. It's close to a 70% open rate.
Yeah.
It can seem personal. It can seem almost from somebody that they might know in the business world, and they pop it open. 70% is definitely some of the highest we have seen. And then before you head home, that's a pretty interesting one. That gets a good reply rate. We schedule that to go right out before or after 5 o'clock, the prospect's time zone. Also has a pretty decent reply rate. So before you head home, we've tried that out in the past quarter and seen some good success there as well. But the key here is keep it short. If you can have those dynamic fields with the tool you're using, use them to your advantage. And, don't be overly long or too, quote unquote, product specific in that, ROI times this or, anything there. Save any value you can add really to the company in the email itself. You just got to get it opened.
Yeah. And don't put request for meeting or anything like that in the subject line either. I see
Definitely
a lot
not.
of people ask, um, I kind of look at it like this. The subject line is kind of like the trailer for the movie. Don't put what happens in the end into the trailer. Like, don't give away everything that's in the email in the subject line. Have, a little bit of like a surprise. You know what I mean? Um, Millie, on your guys' end, and we're going to look at some of the subject lines I think that you guys, well, at least one of them that you guys use. How do you think about subject lines? What are some of the principles? What kind of techniques do you see working well to get folks to open emails these days?
Yeah. Yeah. I would echo everything here for sure. We employ a lot of the same strategy and thought here. We've done quite a bit of analysis recently, and specifically 32 characters seems to be the sweet spot. I think one thing that we're really cognizant of right now is that a lot of the time, Google is now adding, right, external email to the beginning of this. So it'll say external email in big brackets and then whatever is coming. So if that subject line is not super relevant, again, back to that word, and action oriented, right, you're not even going to think about opening up that email.
Yeah. I want to give a quick visual. Actually, this is always kind of fun. I do this in trainings. So that's really interesting because I noticed on some of the emails that you pulled, it said external email. I never really thought about the fact that you need to take that in consideration because that's eating up space in the subject line too.
I think that's back to that
Um,
sophistication of your IT, right? Larger companies have a lot of things in place to make sure that sales emails stay out of, their employees' inboxes. You
yeah,
can still get past that, right? If that subject line's really compelling, if it hits home.
yeah. I want to share something to give everyone a little visual here. So I tag all of the cold emails that I get, which is nothing compared to most prospects. If you're reaching out to an executive, they're not getting like 3 or 4 a day. They're getting like up to 100 potentially per week. But this is, I always like to give people this visual. This is what you're competing against. You know, most of these, I have quality websites, a digital, I mean, it's just like there's so much, it's so obvious that it's a cold email. And one of the things I always talk about is how could we also put together a subject line that looks less like a stranger and more like how someone might email internally, you know? Because these here look a lot to me like if I go to my promotions folder, they look a lot like these. And I don't want the email to look like a marketing email. I want it to look more like stuff I have in my primary inbox. You know, like thank you, available for editing, intros, intro to so and so, distribution for the sequence. You know, it's like this is how people email each other that they know. You know, if I can replicate that a bit, I always think that that's pretty powerful. Let's get into some of the breakdowns. Let's take a look. Millie, you're up first. Let me share this. And let's take a look at some of the emails. Keep the questions coming to you guys in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. All right. So you picked out a few, Millie. Walk us through
Yeah.
this email. Why did you pick this one as one of the bad examples? What sticks out to you here in a good and bad way? And this is
Yeah.
very typical. We get a lot of emails like this. Your prospects get a ton of emails like this. But yeah, give us a little insight into why you picked this one and why this is
Yeah.
email.
Um, I'm hoping that everyone's noticing quite a few of the like big misses here. I think, again, back to my external email. Let's talk about the subject line really quickly. So even though it says external email and it says free, when it actually wasn't threaded as a reply, it just actually came through on its own. If that had said external email and then it said like an outbound prospecting tips and tricks course, I might have been really excited about this email, right? But the thing that they missed here is I'm not a content marketer at all. So from the very outset, they've emailed this to the wrong persona, to the wrong set of titles potentially, or lumped me as a revenue generator into demand gen, into lead gen. And that's a huge miss. I think some of the other things here that really stuck out to me is our content marketing intensive course. The email is not threaded. So I don't know who our is. Who is this person? I have no idea who they are, what their company is. I want you to be upfront about you, your business, right? If I'm going to respond back to this. And I guess the last thing I'll say on this is the spacing right between might this be of interest to you and if you don't want me to email you, just reply to this message and let me know. Like, don't put the unsubscribe before the sign off. Like that, you're not doing yourself any favors to put that before the regards. You might think, oh yes, I'm giving people the option to opt out of this. They'll find out if they want to unsubscribe, if they don't want you to contact them anymore, they'll get to that part, but don't, shorten the possibility that you might actually get a response here.
Yeah. Clear spray and pray, as a lot of people are saying in the chat. So, Millie, for you, in the subject line, do you think about the placement of the personalization too? So, for example, if I'm going to use a company name or a first name or something like that, like pushing it at the very end of the subject line, it could get cut off. For some people too. Do you think about, like, in the test you guys have done, the placement of like what goes in the front, like what gets front loaded in the subject line versus back loaded? Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, and I would absolutely say, like, back to Jerry's examples before, I think you get many more B's if you use the company name versus the person's actual first name. Like back to, Jason, you were showing your inbox. If somebody puts my name in a subject line, I know it's a sales email. It's very clearly. No one that I know of who's important to me is going to use my name in the subject line when they send me an email that's of importance. So I think personalization is fine at the end, but this would probably be better if it didn't have it at all and it just had this course that was really relevant and related to who I am and my role, or it was switched up completely and used my company.
Yeah, love it. Let's keep rolling. So this is one that this was sent to you. This
Yeah.
is a cold email that you marked well, and feel free. I blurred out the reps, kind of details and stuff, but if you want to mention the company, feel free. This is a good email. We're not shaming anyone here, so feel free to do that if you'd like. But what sticks out to you about this email? And let us know in the chat too. What do you guys like or dislike about this email? But this is one that you liked, Millie. So walk us through this one.
Yeah, I think generally like the subject line is referring to like a pain point that I might have. So immediately I'm like, oh, if this had landed for me and budgeting was that problem, for sure, I would have been really interested to open it. Um, I think that the links included in this email are smart resources. They're not just, hey, go to this page and fill out this form. They're educational resources that help me do my own research about their company. And that's really important, right? Because I might not be ready to respond to this email right now, but I would love if you could provide me my, nighttime homework and reading about your business so that I could do that research on my own. If you don't provide that opportunity for me to dig in, I can't do it, right? And this might just get, trashed. I also really enjoyed the fact, and maybe this is intentional, and maybe this was just a blanket email to everyone, but ZoomInfo is an enterprise company, and they used Cisco, DocuSign, Verizon, Logitech, who are also enterprise level companies in tech, have a similar level of sophistication that my business does. And so that's really relevant to me that those companies would actually be using their service product. And then, I think just generally the pain points that they've highlighted hit home to me. Slower lead response times, lower conversion rates, lost leads, that's stuff that I deal with and I'm trying to consistently optimize and fix.
Yeah. So one thing I want to point out is that there's not really any personalization in this email, but because the message is relevant to you, it caught your eye. That's a
Right.
really good example of like the thing needs to be relevant to what people like I might care about, you know? Jerry, what are your thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Millie. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, maybe there is personalization in this, right? If those Cisco, DocuSign, Verizon, Logitech change depending on the segment that was targeted, right? Maybe they had a SMB versus a mid-market versus an enterprise version of this email. Maybe that leading to slow lead response times, lower conversion rates, lost leads, that snippet could be customized. So it's possible that this actually was a really personalized at scale email. I don't know that for a fact, but there are ways that I could see in this email that potentially if it was targeted at a different persona or a different industry, this would look differently.
Got it. Jerry, how do you think about in emails that you guys have sent, how do you think about social proof, if at all? Like name dropping. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to a point. I mean, this one is definitely relevant to have those companies in there to tie into ZoomInfo. I also like on this email the CTA, honestly. It's not asking for 15 or 30 minutes like every other cold email. Interested to see how it works, check it out on the App Exchange. It's pretty light, and the prospect can dig into it. But, having relevant enterprise organizations in this works with ZoomInfo. If it's a blanket email, I hope they're only targeting, larger organizations, because you can definitely miss to some degree if you start to target startups and you're leveraging Cisco and Verizon.
Yeah.
But I like the relevance on that point, and the CTA is not generic.
Got it. And just to point out to everyone too, you'll get this deck afterwards. I think the important part is to not look at this and how can you make it your template. It's to just take bits and pieces from it. So maybe you take away the CTA, from this. Maybe you take away the social proof part and like the name dropping part. Maybe the thing you got was how link to my website, kind of thing. So keep that in mind for those of you guys watching. Let's keep moving. So we got another one. So this is something that you guys use at ZoomInfo. So kind of talk me through what about this email works. What are some of the kind of principles behind this? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think the key point to this is, I have a little bit more detail around sort of the segmentation and strategy behind how this was developed. But I think at our core, what myself and my team, right, are trying to do for our sellers is take a real micro segment. And you can see that here, right? This specifically targeted operations and specifically data titles at federal agencies. So we tied both the industry and the persona together, right, in a very specific persona, and then use that micro segment of potential customers to identify, right, an opening hook and a value statement right at the beginning that is really relevant to them. It introduces who we are and what we're trying to do and offer them. We have that social proof point. I think there's potentially more we could have done there, right? Maybe there was an actual link to a case study of us working with a federal agency specifically that we could have used. You'll see that personalization, that test ZoomInfo account. We have, that company's natural name as a custom token that we use versus, I don't know, Bob Inc. or whatnot. And I think what I really try to coach folks on is using a clear and direct CTA. I think Jerry's point about like always asking for 30 minutes doesn't always work, right? Or you see that over and over again. But I think what you want to try to do, right, is be clear and direct about what you want and what that conversation is going to entail. If you just say, hey, can we find 30 minutes to chat? Not as great as saying, can we find 30 minutes to chat about X and do Y?
Yeah. I want to ask you about a couple things. People are asking about in the chat, and I'm curious too, because there are certain things I think that specifically the industry and the persona that you reach out to that can, sort of vary too. So length of email and then use of bullet points. So what are your thoughts on length of email? Because this is probably longer than most cold emails.
Yeah.
And there's bullet points in here, and there's a lot of just controversy, I guess, on what is
Yeah, and
so,
that's totally fair. We have a really different strategy based on persona. So data and operations personas, we find, want more information that they can take back and mull on from the outset. Versus if I was sending this to a salesperson, they'd be like, too long, didn't read, right? But on the definitely when you're speaking to operations, IT, data science, data analyst, data management, those titles we've found actually want a lot more information from you up front, more of an upfront contract that they can go back and dig into with their teams.
That's interesting. So basically people that might be more technical or logical, sort of in nature, not being afraid to include some more, information.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
They're going to do a lot of research on their own before they ever come back to you and have a conversation or have a meeting.
Yeah. Very counterintuitive. Okay,
Yeah.
let's keep rolling. Okay. Gerald, we got some from you. You guys picked out a bad, kind of email here. So let me know, what don't you like about this?
Yeah, I mean, this looks like emails everybody gets, pretty much. Hope all is well. I think, Jason, if you went to your inbox, you'd see that, 100 times scrolling through your inbox. To start with the email, seeing that your title over at company, very generic, not really personalized because it's pulling dynamic fields. So it's just pulling what the Salesforce or your CRM could have for title and company, and it could say the wrong title, it could say, Revenue Inc. Clearly it's just pulling the hyperlink. I wanted to quickly introduce myself and our solution, reaching out here from X company. We do this. Here's some features. I'd love to further introduce it. Do you have a few minutes to speak? It's really just a mass spread email over here. It's is not personalized, it's not targeted, they're probably going to dump 1,000 people in here. Fingers crossed they even get a single reply with something like this. So these kind of emails are not going to build repeatable results. They're going to be very widespread. They're going to be, not much effort, no personalization, and you're not going to see good results from them.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to read too.
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys. So, greetings. Should you ever open an email and say, "Hope your week is going well. Hope all is well. How are you doing?" What are your guys' thoughts on this?
I like to not do that just because, as I said earlier, that preview section, you want to treat that importantly, and just saying hope all is well or hope the week's going great to somebody who you haven't met yet is not gonna be a good way for them to get an open on the email. So, if you could be more specific, get to the point, be quick, especially with a cold outbound email, that's always what I recommend. You want to keep it, this one isn't overly long, but it's not personalized, and I probably wouldn't even get it open with hope all is well in the beginning.
Yeah. Millie, what about introducing yourself? Hey, my name's Jason, and I'm the so-and-so at ZoomInfo. What are your thoughts on introductions and things like that in emails?
Ooh, outbound cold, we definitely shy away from that and would rather an opening hook, highlight a trend or highlight an insight that's relevant to their business or their discipline.
Yeah. What about in this first line too? And I'm asking this because I see a lot of the companies I work with, some of them are very big and they do a lot of these things. But I saw that you're the job title over at that company. What about a line like that acknowledges the job title? What are your guys' thoughts on doing stuff like that? Is it necessary?
I mean, they know their title.
You guys can be opinionated too and disagree with each other or disagree with me. We can have a little controversy too, you guys.
I mean, they know their title. If you can bring more personalization and more relevance to it, you're going to get a better reply rate. Just saying title, you can just throw a dynamic field in there and not get it. If you can say, hey, I saw you're increasing hiring, SDRs, our platform can help scale that. It's like you want to be more personalized with value you can provide rather than just being like, I saw you're the head of sales, you must be scaling that. Like, avoid title and be personalized.
Yeah. And also I think that job title is one of those dead giveaways of a merge tag. So if you could say something like, as a sales leader, you might be doing this, or many of the sales leaders we work with at companies like X, Y, and Z typically prioritize this or run into these issues. Something that's a little bit more, again, it's when you think of how people would email each other that they know, they just don't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I definitely think it's bucketing. It's bucketing that data, Jason, like you're saying. So if you want to focus on sales and marketing or sales and digital marketing versus demand gen, use those terms, those bucketed terms, demand gen leaders, digital marketing leaders, even sales development leaders. Be as specific as that.
Exactly. Okay, so let's take a look at, and by the way, again, you guys are going to get this deck afterwards. So this is a kind of a really good example of something that you could fill in the blanks, but not just with merge tags. You can kind of fill in relevance and things like that too. But so Jerry, walk us through this template here, this sort of fill in the blank, kind of template. What works about this style of email? What do you like about it? And feel free in the chat, you guys too, to give us your feedback too, or questions or anything that you got there too.
Yeah, this is obviously really short, really to the point. You can see, obviously, anybody can try this out. It's pretty much relevance, value prop, CTA. Keep it brief, keep it personalized, and you can do this at scale. So reaching out because I recently noticed, Jason, you held a great webinar on good, bad, and ugly emails. Like, you get quick right there. Start with the relevance. In short, our solution, really quick value prop to specific to that persona or that person or that company. Then you can close on a CTA. Again, here, like I was saying, I test subject lines. I'm going to test different CTAs here as well, at scale. So I'm going to have different variants for different ways to close. How does your calendar look like for a quick call? Sometimes I'll even ask an open-ended question. If we're having a tough time getting reply rates, let's just start the conversation without asking for a direct time. Let me just ask an open-ended question and see if we can start the dialogue that way. That's another recommendation that's not here on the screen. So the call to action, a lot of people go for a call, test it out with asking just an open-ended question that you would if you were on the phone with somebody. But yeah, this is going to be short. You want to keep it short. We see really good rates with short emails, especially for cold outbound. You don't need to start with first name from company. You can even just go and reaching out because, or start with relevance, webinar you hosted. So you can, it's all about testing out different things to see what resonates with your persona. Because as stated earlier, somebody in engineering is going to resonate. Maybe a more technical email to somebody who's in, a sales leadership or marketing persona. We're quick to the point. This is what we do. This is how I can add value. Does that resonate? So these aren't going to be a one-size-fits-all because everybody on this call, I'm sure, sells to different personas, and we see, different CTAs, different value props resonate in different industries. But from a high level, you can start with this point and adjust the first few words, adjust the CTA, and see how your results are.
So let's talk about CTAs. So call to actions, because a few people were asking, what is a CTA? So your call to action, that's sort of what is the ask? I think a really important thing to mention is you should have a CTA. I see a lot of emails with no CTA. It's just like, hey, we do this, and no ask of any kind. So I'm trying to reduce the friction, the effort of responding. What does this person want from me? I'm sort of answering that question. So you mentioned something really specific though around the types of call to actions. They're kind of like these hard CTAs, right? That are more specific asks for a meeting, or it might say, do you have 30 minutes on Tuesday at 8 a.m. PT or 10 a.m. PT, versus more of a soft call to action that is kind of a more open-ended question. I'll kick this over to you, Millie. With CTAs, how do you think about CTAs, and do you test them? And if so, how do you test them? What are you thinking about for those, call to action lines at the end of the emails?
Yeah, absolutely. Testing is critical. We do a lot of A/B testing around the soft versus hard, and what point in the sequence or in that narrative that you're creating do you have that softer CTA versus a harder CTA, right? Maybe you lead with a question, and then the next email asks for a meeting. And then the next email after that is more maybe really soft, hey, I added this webinar in here, thought it might be, interesting, something that you can review when you have some time. I'd love to talk about it if you have questions. Yeah. And so you have a mix of things in there, and you can test, what works or what doesn't, depending on, your engagement performance.
Yeah. In the CTA, we had Will from a company called Lavender. It's this email, Chrome extension and app that works pretty well. But they found that the CTA, it doesn't have to be a question either, which is kind of interesting because I don't really have a lot of CTAs and emails that are more statements. Let's talk about this if this is interesting, versus is this interesting, kind of thing. I wanted to ask also, what are your guys's, Jerry, I'll kick this question your way. What about calendar links? Do you put these into cold emails? Are they in the signature? What's your take on calendar links and when to use them?
Yep. So we test out the calendar links pretty much on every engagement we work with. I don't see too much success with it in the first email. You can always have it in your signature, have it there, or if somebody can be quick to book if that's the way they like to. We see success if someone's asking for time, then you can reply with the link to your calendar for them to find time to their convenience, not just in the first email. So if you get a reply that's positive, you can reply with your calendar link, have it in your signature as well, but just leaving it there, we don't really see too many people clicking it and just booking time on their own.
Yeah. What about you, Millie?
Yeah, I can echo that 100%.
Yeah. I also see you mentioned knowing your audience. I think that's super important too. When I noticed technical, more IT type roles or security roles, these people are just clicking on less links usually in emails. So just be mindful of who you're reaching out to as well. Okay, I got a couple, and then we'll just kind of open it up and we'll save some time for some Q&A. I get a lot of emails like this. This is a little bit of a different flavor from what we've shown so far. The thing that I don't like about this email, although the subject line was good, it was my name and the company, which is a bit of a dead giveaway to me that it's a cold email, but I'm not opposed to that. The thing that I don't like about this is I have this thing that I say, don't prospect to make a sale, prospect to start a conversation. And I look at selling and prospecting as two very different, very similar, but very different goals in those activities. And I think where people can make a mistake is when they try to sell their solution too much in the email versus just getting me interested in like checking it out at a later time. So this one, it's from a well-known company. It's just super lazy in my opinion. I wanted to make sure our product is on your radar. What day is best to chat about running engaging webinars on? I run 2 or 3 webinars every month. It would have been really, really easy to say, I enjoyed this webinar. It doesn't really talk about challenges either. Like, what is someone that runs webinars, like, what are typical challenges I might have that they could help with? Like, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, just the coordination of the webinars, getting the landing pages put up, like doing the prep calls with folks like you. It's a lot of work to do a webinar. There's so many things they could talk about that would be frustrating to me in this email. And I feel like this is just a huge wasted opportunity, honestly. Is there anything for you two that sticks out in a good or bad way about this email?
It's pretty empty. There's not really much there compelling enough to reach back out. Wanted to make sure blank is on your radar. You have to do the work to click that link, it looks like, to go research on your own, which is the best, and then just closing on next steps. So really no compelling reason to reach back out.
Yeah. I think one of the just like the easiest things that you can do is before you send an email out, read the email and go, did this email talk about you the entire time, or did you talk about your prospect the entire time? And if you're leaning towards talking about yourself for more than 50, 60% of the time, rewrite it.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Okay, I got a couple good ones. These types of emails get pretty good responses. So there's, just to explain kind of the principle behind this email, I think that I'm curious your guys' take on this too. I like using an email as a way to start a conversation and get a reply versus to like with the goal of booking a meeting. And I like doing that for a couple of reasons, but one of them is if a prospect responds to this email and says, send the case study over, as a rep, I'm going to immediately pick up the phone and call them. Because their line is usually in their email signature. And I'm going to say, hey, Jerry, you responded to my email earlier about the GameStop case study. Yeah, I figured I'd pick up the phone and call you and kind of do this the old-fashioned way. It's not totally self-explanatory. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're focused on around A and B so they can get some good information over to you? And then you're going to end up asking for the meeting over the phone. So it's a really good way to find hand raisers and to warm up the cold calls. But this one's really simple. If you guys have really good case studies and I'm reaching out to other VPs of enterprise architecture and I have good social proof, I'm just going to drop the company's case name of the case study in there in the subject line, and then the company I'm reaching out to. Sometimes they're competitors too. So that's often like a big thing that they'll open. And it's just like, hey, so-and-so shared how they got this. I don't even know what it means to implement a well-defined integration, by the way, when I was working with this rep. But it's like, that was the result. Is it cool if I share the case study with you? And we don't put the case study in the email. So we get them to ask us for it. And then if they respond 2 days later, or if they don't respond, excuse me, we'll send it over anyways. But it gives them a chance to engage with you. And then the PS is where we put the personalization. Let me know what you two think, though. What do you like or dislike about this email, this approach?
Yeah, I mean, I like the PS a lot. I see that work fairly consistently just to add the relevance, like a little kicker at the end that could get them over the line to reply to that email. And then the call approach for sure. At Revenir, we are a call first shop. We do omni-channel heavily, but we do want to get people on the phone because, we can actually overcome their objections once we actually get them on the phone. So definitely, if you get a reply and you have their phone number, go after on the phone for a follow-up. 100% recommend that approach.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would maybe poke holes in here is if this was sent from an SDR, I don't really want to have a conversation with an SDR about a case study. So you might think about who this would be best sent from. Like if this was sent from an AE or maybe used with an existing customer to cross sell, I think this could be really, really impactful.
Yeah, good feedback. Okay, we got one last one, and then we'll kind of open it up here. This is a little bit more of a longer, form email. So subject line is using something called rule of three. So we take a couple companies that were mentioned in here and then kind of smash their company right into the middle there. It's got the personalization. So they have a solution. They're not a recruiter, but they have a platform that can help people recruit workers for their warehouses and that sort of stuff. But you got your personalization, a customer, kind of story about someone that talks about something they were frustrated right now. Anything labor market related is going to be pretty hot right now. And then social proof. Interested in chatting further. And this one I think had like an 8 or 9% reply rate, assuming that you customize that first line of the email pretty well. But I think the big thing that I wanted to do here is like this language couldn't keep up with customer demand. There's a big opportunity to grow right now, but finding labor, quality labor is their toughest challenge. Like this is specifically stuff I'd hear folks mention in call recordings. So I think that's really important too, is getting the language of your customer and your prospects into the email, especially some of the more emotional things that they might talk about. But what's your guys' take on this one? What do you like or dislike about an email that's a little bit more in this style?
I mean, I like how the relevance around working with companies like Coca-Cola and Good Foods are solving this problem. It really establishes the brand that we have reputable clients that we're already solving this problem for, and you fit in a similar bucket as them. So I like that a lot. The length isn't too long. Anything longer than this, I would say, cut it off at this point, for a cold outbound email, just because it is probably getting to that limit on character-wise, I would say. But overall, I think resonating to other companies their size and how you're already solving the problem is a very important part of this email.
Yeah, I think to your point real quick, I do think they could cut this email down by probably 30 to 40% in terms of the text. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences, 6 sentences. I think we could get that down to 3 or 4. What about you, Millie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the empathy in this email. I think if this hits home with that person and the person they've targeted here really does have that pain point, there's no reason why you wouldn't take this call.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, Scott says chatting further, need better wording. This is something that I use the word chat a lot. Some people feel like that is too informal. But here, let's stop sharing here. We got about 5 minutes left. Let's get to some Q&A. If you guys got a question, feel free to drop it into the Q&A. I highlighted a couple. Yuki, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asks how many of the relevant individuals within a company should be reached out to with the same sequence? So I think that's a good question. So if you're reaching out to multiple people at a company, how do you guys figure out how many? And then do you, if at all, spread out those messages so that we're not emailing like a dozen people, let's say, at the same time? But Jerry, how do you guys do that?
Yeah, definitely got to be careful. Like with my group, we'll Slack an email, be like, oh, is anyone interested in this? And then we'll all Slack each other the same exact email that they all sent to us at the same time. So that definitely happens at other organizations, I'm sure. So if you see multiple people at the company that you want to target, and you know that they're most likely communicating on the same team, you got to be personalized and relevant. You can't send them a blanketed email because, especially if they get it at the same time, they're most likely going to talk to each other. And if they figure out it's just a marketing email, it's going to be really tough for them to engage with it. So spread it out over time. I like to focus on about 3, decision makers, quote unquote, or high level people to focus on to start out with. And think about bottom up or top down approach with the focus on email. If you get bottom up, and you can build some relationships, at that part of the organization to get introduced higher up. That could be a good strategy. Or if you have really, really good relevance on the decision maker high up, only focus on them for a little bit. But don't put everybody in a sequence going at the same time or the same day with the same message. You're going to get, called out. You could end up on LinkedIn. It could be other things that happen. So definitely focus on only a few people at a time. If you have multiple people, personalize it, make it look different.
Yeah, I think Dylan Weiss, this answers your question too. Millie, how do you think about like the making the messaging different for people of different levels of seniority within the same department?
Yeah, we do this a lot actually. I think the first thing we think about is matching sender for sender. So one of the things that's really, or sender for the to the prospect. So a lot of the time we'll do like exec to exec, manager to manager, and then sort of rep to rep type messaging and personalize that way. And it's just a completely different set of roles, rep to rep versus exec to exec. Your pain points are different, the messaging is different, the length of the email could be different, the type of resource you're going to use in each of those. If you did have a link or it was, a couple of emails in that sequence and you wanted to add an attachment or a video, all of those messages are going to be uniquely different because the value prop to each of those different seniority levels is uniquely different.
Yeah, that's a really good point I want to double click on because I see a lot of people, they'll reach out to marketers and then they'll send the same message to a marketing manager as like a CMO at a company with 1,000 people. I mean, these are very different jobs, that these people have. We're out of time, you guys. This is super fun. Millie, you want to let people know where they can either connect with you or learn more about ZoomInfo?
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, just my full name, Millie Beetham. I think I'm one of one, so it should be easy to find. And then, yeah, you can connect with me there, and I'll connect you with my team through our ZoomInfo channels.
Yeah, and I'll drop your LinkedIn profile in here. And Jerry, what about you? Where can people check out Revenuer, connect with you, all that kind of good stuff?
Yep, for myself, LinkedIn, feel free to shoot me a connect, ask me any questions. Happy to have a conversation there. To further look at Revenuer, revenuer.io. Stop by. We have some blogs and white pages on outbound strategies. Feel free to check them out. And like I said, reach out on LinkedIn with any questions.
All right, just drop those into the chat. Thank you, you two, and everyone else. Thank you for the engagement and the chat. This is super fun, and have a good rest of your week. Enjoy talking with you guys. We'll see you
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
later.
Bye.